Well, hello and welcome to Show Me the Money Rugby League TV and the Championship 2025 preview. Unfortunately, we are not in the studio, so we are doing this remote, but we wanted to make sure we got it done in time and, of course, ahead of the new Championship season, which, of course, starts later on this evening with that great tie in the south of France between Toulouse and the Widnes Vikings. Jimmy Mackey's joining me here. I've got a cup of tea. I'm sure Jimmy's got a cup of tea. And over the next hour, we're going to do our best to preview and dissect what we think is going to happen in what is going to be an absolutely amazing Rugby League Championship season. Jimmy, thank you for joining us. Just give us your thoughts, your overviews on where you see, we say it every year, the Championship is going to be the best yet. 13 teams. Who knows what's going to happen come October? We know promotion and relegation on field has gone. We're in this IMG era. I think this is probably the most exciting year in this current IMG system where you are going to see a lot of movement come the end. There's a lot of clubs in the Championship, Bradford, Toulouse, York, just to name three, who have high aspirations of replacing the current status quo come October.
Yeah, totally. I think you've summed it up well there. I think we touched on it when we did our mini catch-up the other week, didn't we? I think it's probably the first year for a long time where there's no, real clear favourite or two clear favourites, and then a probable gap between third place and the rest of them. But that sets us up for the most exciting race for the top, and race for the top six, and race for the top four to get that advantage in the playoffs. The teams you named there will have one eye on the IMG situation, and even teams who know that they're almost no chance of getting in next year. As we know, the on-field performance counts for an average of, is it 3 years? Or the past 2 years? Yeah, 3 years.
Yeah, so the averages with finance, attendances, the sustainability, it's all done on a 3-yearly basis. So performance is 3 years.
Yeah, so even other teams, Sheffield, Halifax, Widnes, Oldham, to name a few, they'll be thinking, well, even if, we know it's a bit too much to hope we'll get in next year, where we finish this year is incredibly important for our 2-year plan or our 3-year plan, just to squeeze those tiny bits of points which could make all the difference. We know it's going to be really tight for which teams stay in Super League or whether anyone else can join them. So every little helps, which I think is one of the benefits of this IMG system, is that for a lot of teams, there's always something to play for. There'll be no case of rolling over come the end of the season if they feel they can't achieve, a certain position. Because as we saw last year, I think last round of the year, there was huge potential for teams finishing anywhere between 3rd and 7th, 4th and 8th, and that sort of thing. So, yeah, there's so much to play for. I think there's even a bit of cash up for grabs for the winners of the grand final, if I'm not mistaken. So even that's a big incentive. So, yeah, I'm excited. And I know we've said it before, but I totally agree with you. This has got to be the most exciting championship we've seen.
Well, obviously, the championship starts later on this evening. As we've already mentioned on the full 80 minutes, March the 12th is D-Day, seismic D-Day, because there is the council meeting in Wakefield, and I'm led to believe 7 or 8 championship clubs will be joining the 9 Super League clubs in voting out the RFL. So I know we're doing this before that, but I know everyone's saying, well, IMG's here to stay. I guess it is currently, but, I guess we have to have one eye on what's about to transpire at Wakefield. And just a little bit on that, I know me and Craig have done a special show on that, but for anyone watching this, it's interesting. In the past, there's been little clusters of clubs who have, like Kevin Nicholas last year, and Dewsbury wanting to reward whoever won the grand final, promotion and relegation, to come back, and that was narrowly defeated. But this feels different. So I guess we are starting the season in the known, but as always is the case with Rugby League, Jimmy, in a month's time, if we were doing this show in a month's time, the lie of the land probably changes if the vote goes against the RFL and IMG. But it's going to be interesting to see what happens there, because how that vote goes probably, does actually shape the championship for 2025 and also League One. But yeah, great championship season. I'm really, really looking forward to it. As I've said repeatedly for a few months now, it's an absolute shame, crying shame, there is no broadcast contract in place. Unfortunately, Premier Sports, for the second year running, have come back with the same offer, which basically there's no financial incentives to the clubs at all whatsoever for them to have their games on Premier Sports. So, as you see in this weekend, you're going to see London versus Bradford, Bradford versus London on the live stream. You're going to see Barrow versus Hunslet on the live stream. You're going to see Oldham versus York on the live stream. So the clubs are charging supporters, for instance, Bradford, £10, Toulouse against Widnes later on this evening. It is on the live stream for free on YouTube. So, there's going to be a mixture of, you've probably, as championship fans, you've probably never had it as great, Now every, obviously, stream is going to be different. Like the Bradford one, 5 cameras. There'll be me and John Bastian calling that one versus 1 camera set up at certain clubs. But, if you're a championship fan, you've probably never had it as good, where every Sunday or Saturday, if the game's a Saturday, you can pay your £10 and you can watch your club. So I guess this is probably a positive of IMG in a sense. We can't get a TV deal. The clubs have voted down the TV deal again for the second time. And, the next best thing is, as IMG have told the clubs, you've got this content, it's your intellectual property, get it out there, out there. But, it's going to be great. And who knows what's going to happen, Jimmy, come September with the runners and riders, because the Super 8s are back. There's a lot of jeopardy. And as we're about to start our preview and predictions on where the clubs are going to go, I think probably, Jimmy, with the toughest task that we've had is deciding who the runners and the riders are and who's going to be the bottom 4 clubs facing that jeopardy from those League One sides.
Yeah, totally. And just touching on that, what you said about the streaming and the lack of TV deal, it's, on the face of it, and in many years gone by, but the narrative around that would just be purely negative. What a shame we've not got it on TV. It deserves to get coverage. It's a great, competition. But clubs are starting to hopefully realise the opportunity this gives them to create another income stream. And yes, clubs who might start with 1 camera, if fans buy into it and they can realise what money they can raise from streaming their games, and particularly some fixtures which would involve a lot of travelling for away fans, then they might realise that actually next season they can afford a couple more cameras and they can charge a bit more. So it's baby steps for a lot of clubs. Bradford a little bit ahead of the curve, but as we know with most sports now, and as Craig Harrison and many others have been banging on for years about, this was always the direction it was going to go in. And as long as it doesn't cost us bums on seats and we can get the best of both worlds, then hopefully this is the start of something brilliant. We don't need to worry about, certain production companies and broadcasters offering low balls, because they know they can. And clubs will get to a point where they'll then have the ability to negotiate as a group, because they know what money they can bring in themselves by doing it themselves. So I'm really positive about that. And look, I'd rather watch Widnes and Toulouse this evening on 1 camera than not at all. It's
totally agree, Jimmy. Well, judging by what's happening in the St Helens Salford game, I know I'll be switching over at half-time for the Challenge Cup draw, but I will be watching Toulouse against Widnes. I'm led to believe there'll be a couple of cameras on that game.
Right.
And yeah, look, with the greatest respect, the Bibbies, I mean, we'll probably discuss this on a full 80, but yeah, the Bibbies, after last year being given Salford v Hull FC and Catalans Hull FC, those big blowouts, Salford sending the kids to Saints, the BBC have been dealt another poor hand. But let's start our championship preview for 2025, and I know there'll be some League One club owners, coaches, fans watching this, and they'll be saying, where's our show? Trust me, the League One season, it starts in a fortnight's time. You're behind the championship. We will do a very special League One show where we preview those League One clubs. Well, we're going to do it similar to the Super League One.
Yeah.
Thank you for everybody who liked, subscribed, commented on that. So if you are a Championship Rugby League fan, we're going to do the clubs alphabetically. So Jimmy's going to lock in where he feels the clubs are going to go. So am I. And if I just find a post-it note or a big piece of paper, which I have, I can lock in where Jimmy has the teams as well as me. And it's always good to revisit these because I think, Jimmy, when we did it last year, we weren't that far off. But we are going to start with the Barrow Raiders. Paul Carey, he's been there now for 10 years. It's his second stint as the Barrow head coach. And it's fair to say that there was very little for Barrow to celebrate last season. Ultimately, they managed to scramble and stay in the championship. They were certainly in that sort of Swinton, Whitehaven kind of bracket, fighting for their lives. In each of the past two seasons, Jimmy, when you look at what Barrow have done, they've only just managed to survive by a single point. We all remember when they won League One, they come up in the championship, they gave Huddersfield in the Challenge Cup, one of the early games, a run for the money. T. Ritson scoring for fun. Obviously, times have changed, and it does feel that Barrow in 2025, despite some of the new signings, one of those, of course, is Jamie Pye, who is a former St. Helens player, big, massive, towering, 6 foot tall, blockbuster of a prop, which, I'm hoping he hits the ground running. He had a spell at Bradford a few years ago, never really made it at Bradford, but I'm hoping, he can have an impact. I'm not saying Barrow, Jimmy, when you look at things, that a relegation battle is a foregone conclusion by any means. They have managed to keep the core of their squad, their side together. And Paul Carey, what I've seen is on any given day, certainly up there at Craven Park on the Barrow Peninsula, as it's called, they can pick off anyone, as I saw last season with some very, very big wins some big wins against the top six, including a draw against Bradford. So it's going to be interesting to see, how they go, because, they've still got Luke Cresswell, Andy Bullman, Matt Costello, Luke Broadbent, Shane Toll, Brad Walker, Ryan Johnston, Tom Walker, Ellis Robson, Ryan King, Aaron Smith. I look at the squad and I'm thinking this should be nowhere near those bottom 2, bottom 3 positions. But I don't want to throw Barrow under the bus right at the start of the preview. Unfortunately, Jimmy, there is 13 teams and it'll be 13th, 12th, 11th and 10th who are in the bottom 4 fighting for championship survival. I have Barrow in that bottom 4. I have them 12th.
Yes. Oh, so right down there, second from bottom.
Unfortunately, yes. I hope I'm proved wrong on this one, but I just feel because well-documented financial issues, we know the money's tight. I'm not sure if you've seen the latest statement from Barrow. They're wanting to sell shares. They're wanting to raise money. Obviously, Steve Neal, who's run and owned the Barrow club for a number of years, he's done his best. And I think, I wouldn't say this is an SOS, but I think it's an admission that he can only take Barrow so far. And, if there is wealthy investors up there and on the peninsula, we know Barrow's a very profitable and highly marketable submarine town. But, I think with everything, what Paul Carey's got now is what Paul Carey's going to be dealt with, whether or not they can get the loans dual regging.
And I think obviously Steve O'Neill has done an absolutely fantastic job, hasn't he? You know, Barrow's like, you know, inventiveness of bringing in extra money when it was the Euros or the World Cup, and they were having,
Amazing.
you know, they were making, you know, so much money by having fan zones and the local community supporting him. I think there's two aspects to this, just generally. Obviously, our area of expertise with recruitment. I think it's becoming increasingly hard for the Cumbrian clubs to attract players from outside of Cumbria. And there's a couple of reasons for that. One is obviously, you know, the hotbed of players in the Lancashire and Yorkshire area. The travel is significant, the time, the cost, and that sort of thing. But also as well, Barrow were really competitive a few years ago, but there was so many clubs spending a similar amount of money to Barrow at that time. And what I feel we're seeing is a big barrier of them being able to attract players from outside of Cumbria, combined with the fact that other clubs, or certainly a good number of other clubs, are spending a significant amount more. Barrow traditionally would have to pay, and still do, and offer what we call overs for players, where you know that they're getting paid more than they certainly would do closer to home. But now, because other clubs have got bigger budgets, Barrow would have to resort to offering significantly more. And then we get in a situation where there's only so much you can pay for somebody before it starts getting silly. And that's what we've seen. So I feel they're almost a victim of their own circumstance. You know, the landscape's changed. Almost fortunately for them, with Whitehaven and Workington now being in the division below, they can offer, you know, that play at a higher standard to the local players and try and nab a few from elsewhere and try and get as strong a Cumbrian presence as possible. And we know there's an awful lot of talent up there as well. I feel that their challenge over the next handful of years to be able to stay in the Championship and compete is to really find that local talent, nurture that local talent. Players like Charlie Elmsley, who's come all the way through and has now become a big part player for them. They need more of those, and they can't rely on paying over the odds to attract somebody to travel 2 hours to training. So yeah, to summarise, I agree with everything you say. As always, that home advantage is going to be massive for Barrow. I think it's probably worth 2-4 points more than the other teams I've got at that bottom end of the table. And for that reason, I've actually got them one place higher than you. But I do think they'll be in the middle eight. I've got them 11th. And yeah, hoping that they can stay fit, make the most of that home advantage, because I think they're probably in for a real tough season on the road.
Yeah, totally agree, Jimmy. I've got them 12th, you've got them 11th, and just a little bit more on the recruitment, you know, with the greatest respect, when the recruitment is focusing on some of those Whitehaven players like Ryan King, Curtis Tier. Obviously, Keighley didn't make the step up from League One to Championship, so they've taken Alex Bishop and Ellis Robson. You know, when you look at, and you made a good point, when you look at spending and you look at what other Championship clubs are spending, you know, if we were going to rate Barrow's recruitment and spend, no disrespect to any of the recruitment that Paul Carey's brought in, but you would have it in a very weaker, lower position than the majority of the clubs. And that is primarily why I went with 12th. But, you know, we're not far away. I've gone 12th, you've gone 11th.
And yeah, and you know, to finish up on that point, there's going to be a pretty direct correlation between what clubs have spent and where we think they'll finish, because you know ultimately that typically transpires into squad depth and quality in depth, and you know that's something that Barrow certainly don't have as much of as you know other clubs.
We are moving forward. Barrow Raiders locked in. I've got them 12th. Jimmy's got them 11th. Batley Bulldogs. Oh,
the hardest team to call.
Mark Moxon. I think probably maybe London, but we'll move on to them in a bit as we go through the clubs.
Yeah.
Batley Bulldogs, Mark Moxon, certainly a point to prove when you look at how dangerously close Batley were to falling into that trap last year, his first season in charge. You know, they finished 10th last season, and I know some might say, well, similar to Doncaster, there was that period where if they had got 2-3 wins, they would have potentially been on the cusp of the playoffs. There was very little between, you know, a Halifax, a Doncaster, a Batley last year, which of course was trying to avoid the trapdoor and, you know, avoid finishing in that bottom three, as Swinton found out, versus, you know, being in the playoffs. Obviously, you know, I think this is kind of a bit of a reset button for the Batley club. You know, it was only a couple of seasons ago they were, you know, challenging in the playoffs at the top end, Jimmy. You know, I know we're going back about 5-6 years, but they were actually in the grand final. Craig Lingard doing an amazing job when he got them to Lee in the £1 million game. But, you know, the core of the squad for 2025 does remain. And it is going to be down to those, what I would call, you know, your seasoned, marinated championship leaders with that experience, your James Browns, your Dane Mannings, to do what they do best. Anybody who goes to Mount Pleasant, any championship side that face Mark Moxon's Batley, you know you're going to have to get your heads down. You're going to have to work hard. There's a real sort of nuts and bolts, you know, feel to when you're facing the Batley Bulldogs. And, you know, when you look at some of the players who they have brought in, one of them that really excites me is one of the stars from League One last season, Jack Render, of course, who scored 22 tries, I think, in 22 appearances. One of those, of course, against Swinton in the final, which got him into the championship. So, look, clearly a little bit of change. I know they've added Joe Arundel, Ollie Greensmith, Jack Render, but the core of that squad, you know, remains. And Ben White, Josh Woods, on their day, Jimmy, they have two very competent and dangerous, you know, seasoned championship halves, along with Robbie Butterworth at the back, the spine, Alistair Leake, as we know. We've already done a bit on Brown and Manning. Listen, I think Batley, from what I have seen, and I've seen them in a couple of pre-season games, they look good. I think home form, as always, absolutely crucial. Can I see Batley, though, escaping the bottom four? No, I can't. I've got them 10th. I think it's going to be a valiant effort. And I wouldn't be shocked. This is how crazy the championship is this year, Jimmy.
Yeah.
Batley could be one of those clubs that could, in my opinion, finish 7th, 8th, 9th, you know, but unfortunately, 13th to 10th, you're in the bottom four, you're in the relegation mix with your League One clubs. I just have Batley falling short. I've got Batley Bulldogs 10th, but like I say, Mark Moxon, I spoke to him at the season launch. He's really infused. They're going to call on the dual reg partnership, which they've got with Wakefield. I will expect a lot of that. I think that's key. I think that is key. How Mark integrates those Wakefield players. If it's true, Jaden Myers might be going there, Miles Lawford, then wow, those could be game changers. But as we do this now, nothing's confirmed on which players are going from Wakefield to Batley. I have them 10th, Jimmy. Over to you.
Yeah, no, I'm glad you mentioned the dual reg, because we didn't actually mention, you know, Barrow is set up with Salford, you know, and it's a massive thing. These clubs that we expect who are going to struggle with depth, the relationship with the dual reg partner is key right across the league, but arguably for these two, as important as any. Wakefield have got, you know, when we did the Super League sort of review, their squad is not deep in terms of Super League experience and that sort of thing, but they certainly have a good number of players who will be more than capable of dropping down into the Championship with Championship experience, which is key. We often see Super League fringe players drop down to the Champ and they just can't do it. It's such a different game that they cannot play anywhere near as effectively as they might do, you know, in Super League. Whereas the good thing for Batley is some of those Wakey lads have already got the T-shirt. I'm sure most, if not all, of our Championship fans are aware of the home advantage at Batley with the famous hill. It's one of those that everyone, I'm sure, has heard about, but until you're sat at that ground for the first time, everybody's like, wow, I've heard about it. I've heard how significant it can be on the flow of play, but that's massive. And Batley's advantage, like Barrow's in terms of location, is that they know how to play that hill. And that's going to be massive for them this year, as it always is. I've got to mention Dane Manning again, because for me, he's one of the absolute Hall of Fame championship players. They've got him to go around another year. He's as robust as anybody. He's as imposing as anybody in the whole league, and he's instrumental to them. I feel that he is worth 6 to 8 points a year, probably as much as anybody in the league. I think he's that important, because they're in so many games where it's close and it's tight. And I just think when players look around and see Dane not giving up and doing what he does, they've no choice but to join him. They'll probably be too scared to do anything else because they won't want a rollicking off him. So hopefully he stays fit. It probably is his last year, but who knows? I think we've said that for many years. But I'm with you. I've got him in the bottom 4. I've got him in, as a result, in the middle 8. Also in 10th spot. I just think, similar to Barrow, Batley were able to compete, and they did compete, and they've overachieved for many years. But other teams are spending more, and the opportunity to do what they've done in the past, I feel, gets harder every year. So I don't expect them to be challenging those top 6 spots. But we know it'll be tight. They've proved me wrong before. But yeah, I've got him 10th. A very similar season to what they had last year.
Yeah, and just a final point on Batley. I spoke to Mark Moxon, and he said, he's challenging a top 6 playoff place. Anything less, then will be disappointing. But again, we're doing this from what we see, and it's the first club, Jimmy, where we both got the same 10th.
Yeah.
Let us know in the comments. We've done the first 2, 9 to go. Let us know where you think Barrow, Batley, where the strengths and weaknesses are. We are going to try and do a lot of championship content in 2025, considering we're pretty much at 2 or 3 games a week. Right, we're moving on. After Barrow and Batley, we move on to the Bradford Bulls. This is the one. Jimmy, this is the one.
Just so you know, Mick, I've just checked the clock. We got to stick to our 10 minutes maximum. We're not going to get carried away, because even I have got an awful lot to say on Bradford this year. So we'll try and be as disciplined as possible.
Yeah, exactly. 5 minutes apiece. And I know there's this perception, people think this is the Bradford Bulls show. It's not. We've just spent 10 minutes on Barrow, 10 minutes on Batley. Okay, Bradford Bulls. Fresh optimism at Bradford. Noble Mania is back. Brian Noble leading the Bradford Bulls once more. Yes, it's 2 decades on from what you would call the peak of Bull Mania, but certainly after a very, very strong, positive pre-season where Bradford have gone to Huddersfield, beaten a largely full-strength Huddersfield, and last weekend that bar has obviously been raised further still with that great win over the Castleford Tigers. There's a lot of eyeballs, a lot of spotlight on the Bradford Bulls. Personally, Eamon O'Carroll obviously left at the end of last season. Brian Noble, for mine, no-brainer. He is the best man to replace Eamon O'Carroll. He is the person who can build the squad. He's the person who knows the components, and as I'm sure when we have a look at the Bradford squad, there's a lot of size, there's a lot of power, a lot of pace, a lot of physicality. You've added significantly. There's a lot of ins and outs at Bradford, and you can see that the club is serious. Probably when you look at the last sort of 4 years, that shift, that expectation now from the supporters, it has changed. Bradford are a championship main player, and probably rightly so with the squad they've assembled. You've got, Tom Holmes. We all know what Tom Holmes is about. You've got James Meadows, Joe Keys, brand new halfback partnership, which is already pulling the strings. When Jordan Lilly's on the field, as we saw in the Doncaster game, you've then got Mitch Shooter coming off for Lilly. You've then effectively got three halves out there on the field. They're all putting the kicks in. Look, it's a very, very positive time for the Bradford Bulls. They've managed to convince Zach Fulton to come back, such is the lure. And what is interesting is a lot of people obviously are saying, well, how are Bradford, being able to do this? Let me tell you, a lot of hard work. There's a lot of dedicated people behind that Bradford Bulls engine. It's not just the players. It's not just Brian Noble, Lee Greenwood. There's Jason Hurst. There's Nigel Wood. There's Paul Wilde. There's the Varleys. There's a lot of people. Philip Sharp. There's a lot of people on this sort of investment board, on the board, who are investing money. These are Bradfordians. These are people who want Bradford to return to the Super League. But when you are signing the likes of Franklin Pelly, Jaden Ockenball, Wonga Blake, Emmanuel Waney, Joe Keys, James Meadows, Super League players, James Donaldson, there is a lot of pressure. And, I think what you saw last week against Castleford, Jimmy, that probably does, as I've said, I've got all my stuff ready for the London Bradford game tomorrow. It probably does heighten that expectation level, that a return to Super League is imminent. And you look not just on the field with the players that we've mentioned, they've managed to retain the core squad from last year. And in my opinion, Bradford are probably the club that has improved the most in terms of the quality and the depth. That depth is absolutely scary from player one right up into the 30s, with your Jaden Ockenballs, your Sam Ackroyds, your Jamie Gills, your Jacob Batemans. So the depth is absolutely scary. And there won't be, as we've seen in previous seasons, Jimmy, a reliance on dual reg and loans, which has destabilised the club. I think back to last season, they used 47 players throughout the 33 games. Eamon O'Carroll made 104 changes. For the first time in 16 months, Brian Noble has gone back to back after the Doncaster game, the Castleford game. It was the same team. There will be a few changes for this weekend's game against London. But off the field, there's the investment in the new stand, the new directors' facilities, the big screen, the Sky Sports gantry ready potentially for next year. That's all up. Look, I think performance, absolutely key, absolutely vital to Bradford, because the horrific 2022 season, when Bradford finished 9th under John Keir and Mark Dunning, that is now going. Yeah. If Bradford finish top, second, get through to the grand final, could pick up an 1895 cup final win at Wembley, could, I'm not saying they are, could, if they could, win the grand final, those extra points, Jimmy, that'll be not saying it's going to be the difference, but that will make a whole lot of difference, and probably does take them into the promised land. I know Bradford are targeting a Grade A next year. Yeah. They're in a very similar position, Bradford, to where Wakefield were last year, and Castleford, where there will be investment in those sort of financial pillars, which will boost the IMG points. They're already around 13.375. They're not that far behind Salford and Huddersfield and Hull. Obviously, other clubs are bound to improve, but a very, very positive season awaits. Again, as I've said to many, many people, Brian Noble doesn't like me talking about this, but I think when you've got such a large squad with quality and depth, how he keeps everybody happy is going to be key. And as you're going to see this weekend and probably next weekend in round 2 against Hunslet, you're not going to see wholesale changes, but Sam Hallis, 18th man, last couple of games, Emmanuel Waney, Bailey Lou, not being able to get in. You're probably going to see a little bit of change like that. So everybody's happy. Everybody's part of this journey. And I know people are going to look at this and think, well, But look, I'm still torn a little bit between Toulouse and Bradford, because Bradford are a part-time team, Toulouse full-time, but I have Bradford just finishing top of the pile I don't think it's going to be as clear cut as people are making out. Bradford will lose games in 2025. Mark my words. You know, they are still, even 11 seasons after being outside the Super League, Jimmy, you go to grounds and the opposition clubs market it, you know, the former World Club champions, the former Super League champions. Bradford are still a very, very big draw, and they are, in my opinion, at an even greater height now for those other championship clubs to attack and knock them off the pedestal. I Bradford Bulls first. I think it's going to be an amazing season and a season to remember for any Bradford fans. Oh boy, what a journey. This could be, you know, that catalyst this year that sees Bradford return back to where they hopefully want to be, which is the Super League under Brian Noble. Bradford first, looking at him.
Right. Well, I'm not surprised. You deserve that. What was close to 9 minutes, I think, Mick, but never mind. Nice intro. You did.
Jimmy, it was 7.5. Come on.
Fair enough. Yeah, but no, rightly so. You're bound to be excited. There's not many bigger Bulls fans in the country than you.
Whoa. I'm doing this independently, Jimmy.
I know you are, Mick, as you say every week, but us, we know there's obviously passion there, and you and all Bulls fans should be excited because I'm with you. They're in for a big year. I don't think I need to add an awful lot to that. What I will say is, I think one man is by far could prove to be the signing of the year in the Championship, and he could be arguably one of your, if you're not your most important player, and that's James Donaldson. I think he is, when we look at players who can drop down from Super League and be really effective in the Championship, clubs have to pay big money for him. You know, big money in Championship terms. We see an awful lot of these players fail year in, year out. Yes, of course, we'll have good games here and there, but to be consistent and to be worth the money and to be money ballers, even at the top end of the pay scale, it's very difficult. I've said for years that he's the epitome of a player, the way he looks after himself, his attitude, his robustness generally. I think he could be a huge signing for you. It could be, you know, the difference, because I agree with you. It could easily go all Bradford's way at Odsal. You know, it's going to take a hell of a performance or a poor performance from the Bulls to be beaten at home. It's another club with as big a home advantage as any. The team is put together is perfect for the Odsal pitch. The fans, I'm sure, will be coming out in numbers this year with the excitement after, you know, a tough few years. So I've got him top. I've got him top as well. I just think there's too much depth. Even Toulouse being full time, they don't have as much depth as Bradford. We know that Toulouse are more vulnerable on the road, certainly in these early stages of the year. I think they're likely to drop more points than Bradford. I've got them top. You've covered everything. It's a big year for the Bulls. They've got to keep players happy and they can't get carried away. They've got to keep their feet on the ground, but they've got an experienced coaching team who I'm sure will be reminding them of that week in, week out. It's probably a perfect first fixture after the highs of last week because, as we'll get on to, London are going to find it very hard to form a real challenge to him. So even if the performance drops off a bit after the heights of a Cas game, you'll get through it. So yeah, the pressure's on him. The pressure should be on him. The investment is huge. They, for me, will be the top spenders other than full-time Toulouse. And, you know, people say differently. It's all a bit, sometimes, you know, clubs like to play down what they're spending. Well, all clubs do. You know, so the investment's there, the squad's there, the management's there, the home advantage is there. I think it's Bradford's to lose, certainly in terms of the league standings. The real games will come in the playoffs, but I'm with you. Bradford top of the pops. Who've we got next?
You sounded more confident on Bradford than me there, Jimmy.
Well, you've got to be, and Bradford fans have got to be. They've got to remind themselves not to get too carried away. we know how good some of these other teams in the Championship are. And we know that week in, week out, there will be injuries, there'll be bans. And it's getting through those periods of adversity, which separates the very top teams from the top 6 contenders. So you've got to have an air of caution about them. But yeah, I still think, all things considered, the Bulls will have enough to secure top spot.
We've just done Barrow, Batley and Bradford. We're now moving on to D for Doncaster. Well, Doncaster really, in my opinion, were one of the standout Championship sides last season. They won promotion back in 2023, winning the League One Grand Final against the North Wales Crusaders. And, after that near 10-year absence from the Championship, oh boy, they were just 2 places and I think 3 points off the playoffs come the end. Alan Coleman's Widnes Vikings just pipping them. And, the aim from Carl Hall, Richard Orme, when you speak to him at the Super League, the Championship launch, they're saying the aim is even higher. They have invested in the team this year. You look at players like Josh Bowden, you look at Jordan Baldwinson, Andre Savelio, the Papua New Guinean utility edge player, Edine Gebe. There's a lot of excitement in this Doncaster side. I know they had a bit of a dismal showing in the Challenge Cup, their first competitive game against Bradford, but, they were missing a heck of a lot of that forward pack. There was no Andre Savelio, there was no Josh Bowen, there was no Jordan Baldwinson. But look,
same with Sheffield game as well, wasn't it? We've not really seen Danny yet.
Yeah, you've not seen Doncaster hit the stride yet, and it is early days, and there's a lot of these players, Jimmy, as you know from other clubs, that they already had injuries, coming out of last season. So it is going to be very important how Doncaster manage that sort of player rehabilitation and manage that sort of injury table. But look, Andre Savelio, there's a Lee Leopard man, Jacob Jones, who I highly rate in the back row. Look, Doncaster, in my opinion, certainly when they are at full strength, they will do what they did last year, which is go toe-to-toe with those top Championship clubs. They made Bradford work hard at the Keepmoat at the back end of the season. 18-4 it was to Bradford. I went to the game where they beat Toulouse. And you look at players like Craig Hall, like Beretta Farrimore, Reece Lynn, Luke Briscoe. Look, there's a lot of quality, a lot of experience. I know some of these players are past their peak. They're coming to, the twilight years, the end of their career. But look, I think Richard Horne, when you look at that experienced backline, for experience and what those players have achieved in the sport, that's going to go a long way. Where I've got Doncaster ultimately, I think it's going to be very, very similar to last season. Close, but no cigar. I've got them 8th, but don't be shocked if, a couple of results go the other way and they just sneak in 6th. But I've got them 8th. And, I think, again, another season of stabilising and improving. Look, Doncaster, I think, Al Carlow, Richard Orme, what they're doing, great to see. And hopefully the people in the city of Doncaster back the club and we see some big crowds at the Keepmoat. I've got Doncaster 8th, Jimmy.
Yeah, no, totally agree with everything you've said. I think last year, first year in the big time for a while, they had that optimism, confidence, and they had a period, maybe halfway through the season, where they really struggled with injuries, and then they were really vulnerable for that period, because their recruitment last year was tough. Gaining promotion so late in the day, it was hard for them to add an awful lot. They did the best they could. It meant that on their day, they were capable of big scalps. We thought they would be, and they proved us right. I suppose a big question for Donny this year is they've had, another year to recruit Championship quality players. Their guarantee to remain a Championship side was relatively late in the day, and Carl Hall, understandably, was very hesitant to recruit until he knew for sure they were safe, and probably didn't want to tempt fate. He brought a few quality players in, like you've just said. Can they keep that, almost honeymoon season feeling going? Can they back it up? Another year in the top, in the Championship, the higher level than they've played for many years. Can the players they've signed? They've got an awful lot of overseas players. Can they keep their squad fit? They'll be happy. It's one of the happiest clubs you'll ever come across. Players get looked after. There's a great feel about the place, and that goes a long way to on-field results. I think they're really hard to call where they'll finish. Again, there'll probably be a handful of points between potentially 5th and 10th, in my opinion. So I feel they could come anywhere between 7th and 11th on a really bad year. I don't see them getting in the top 6. I think they'd have to have an awful lot of good fortune with injuries and bans. One player last year who was huge for them is Paulie, literally in every sense of the word. A bit like Dane Manning at Batley. He is someone who can win games for him nearly single-handedly. He played a lot of games last year. He played over 20 games. It might have been 28. It was an incredible number. I felt sorry for York because they didn't get anything like that out of him. He's gone there and he's had a bumpy year. And without him, they'd have been, for me, they'd definitely have been 4 points less. I think that's how important he is. They need to keep him on the field. It's going to be a tough year where every club needs their X factor players playing if they want to challenge higher up the league or avoid that dreaded bottom 4. I've got them just staying out of that bottom 4 and probably not challenging for the 6. I think they're one of my couple of teams who I think will be comfortable, but I don't see them challenging. I don't see them getting dragged in. I've got them in 9th place.
Just one below me. There we go.
Yeah.
Doncaster locked in. Let us know in the comments. We've just done Bradford and Doncaster. Where do you feel the Bradford Bulls and Doncaster will fare in the Championship 2025? Moving on, well, we're on Featherstone Rovers now, and oh boy, very, very difficult one, this one, because it's all changed again at Featherstone. Although, like you say, there has been that big turnaround in players, and while some people might have thought with the Mark Campbell era drawing to a close that there has been cost cutting in wake of, obviously, when Mark Campbell had the Featherstone club, all those, several unsuccessful promotion attempts. Well, new owner Paddy Hanley, wow, when you look at the 14 players, that's how many James Ford's brought in at Featherstone Rovers. 14 new additions. You look at players like Daryl Alferts, who, of course, was the Champions' top try scorer last year. You look at Carlos Tuamavave, Clay Webb. You look at Zach Herring, 2 Australians who've come over from down under. Then you throw in Callum Atkins, Ben Reynolds, Connor Jones, who were all part of the Featherstone fabric last year, which saw them, make the playoffs. I think they had a very disappointing season by Featherstone standards last year. They had that very, very early exit in the playoffs to Bradford. But when you look at Featherstone this season, I think it's all going to come down to what James Ford interprets as his strongest 17, because very, very similar to Bradford, there is a lot of depth, there is a lot of quality, not as much as Bradford, but certainly for Featherstone Rovers fans, you would be absolutely looking and licking your lips at potentially what James Ford can get out there on the field. We know Paul Cook's part of James Ford's coaching staff. I think he will absolutely be, key and vital in terms of assisting James Ford. And, when you look at James Ford and what he's trying to do in those pre-season games that I've seen, he has imprinted a lot on Featherstone's attack and their ability to spread the ball, I think they are going to score a number of points. You know, you look at that left edge of Carlos Tuamavavi and Daryl Alfords. You know, for mine, that is up there with your Guy Armitages, your Wonga Blakes, your George Tafuas at Bradford. I think there's going to be a hell of a lot of great, you know, memories and moments for Featherstone. Like I say, you know, that investment by Paddy Hanley, I think it will be rewarded. I have Featherstone in the top 3. I have them just below Toulouse. I've got them 3rd, but I would not be shocked or surprised if Featherstone Rovers were to finish 2nd or even 1st. As I've just said, you know, I look at that squad, Caleb Aikins, that left edge of Daryl Alfords, Carlos Tuamavavi, Gareth Gale, Jaden Hatton. Gale, of course, a very proven try scorer. You look at the halves, you know, I think it's going to be a very good season for Featherstone. You know, and they're not spending as much as they have previously, which might kind of be a bit of a lesson to other clubs that if you do take the Derek Beaumont, Mark Campbell approach and spend over $1 million, it doesn't always bring you success. But yeah, James Ford is going to have a great season with Featherstone. I think, you know, Featherstone very, very firmly a runner rider. They could finish top, but I've got them in top 3. I've got them in the top 3, and oh boy, you know, they're still in the Challenge Cup along with Bradford, Batley, Widnes, and Oldham. Who knows? 3rd.
Yeah, no, totally agree as always with the vast majority of what you've said. I think last year for Featherstone was the epitome of a transition year. It was bound to be a tough year, with the change of, you know, things going on behind the scenes, the change of budget. They were massively behind the 8 ball at the start of last year, and the Fev fans understandably demand a lot. They used to being very successful in the Championship. For me, generally, they demanded too much last year. Fordy got an awful lot of stick. For me, it was, you know, on the whole, undeserved, because I didn't think Fev could do any more than try and sneak into the 6 last year. There was too many changes. There was too many obstacles. I think that the recruitment has been absolutely outstanding this year. I think he's got competition in all over the field. He's got some top quality players all over the field. There'll be players left out on a weekly basis who are class and would walk into nearly every other Championship team. Even in the halves, they've got the new Aussie. They've got Ben Reynolds back for the, I don't know, feels like the 3rd time.
Yeah, 3rd time.
3rd time. They've added Callum Turner, who, you know, is someone who's a top quality player. He's hopefully going to prove it at the top end of a Championship this year, you know, after having obviously his journey through Castleford and having to drop back down and restart his career. Fordy will have no issue at all sticking Callum in against anybody, you know, and that's the sort of thing they've got going on this year. They're in for a big year. I'm with you. I've got them 2nd behind you, behind Bradford, because it's hard to
saying behind me.
I know, I'm so used to it, but it's hard to predict Toulouse. How good will they be at the start of the year? Will they win tonight at Widnes? Well, at home to Widnes. It's so hard to judge how many points they will drop in the early parts of the year. We know when the ground firms up, away games are far less of an issue for them, but their first few away games this year will probably learn a lot about Toulouse. And that's why I've got them 2nd. I think Fev will be incredibly consistent. I think they'll absolutely hammer some teams at home. I think they're probably the team most likely to challenge Bradford at Odsal. I think Fordy's in for a good year. I'm happy that he's got that squad together where there'll be absolutely no excuses from him this year, because he's got probably near enough everybody who he wanted, and he'll be really confident. The signs I've seen of him in pre-season and cup games is fantastic. I feel they've signed the best young, exciting player in the Championship, Bailey O'Connor from Dewsbury, who I think will play a good amount of games for them. They've got a massive pack. everything's set up for a big year. I totally agree with you. There's no reason why they can't win it. I certainly don't see him being outside the top three. So yeah, I've got him second, and the Fev fans will be relieved, and they'll be back to where they believe they should be and where they're used to them being.
Jimmy's got Featherstone second. I've got Featherstone third. Moving on, Halifax Panthers. Well, it's been another winter of turmoil for Halifax. Well publicised financial difficulties. They've been hit with another winding up order from HMRC. The latest club statement was a couple of weeks ago. Halifax, Damien Clayton, Richard Durgan, they believe everything's in hand. But away from obviously what is obviously a season of turmoil, a winter season, an off-season of turmoil, there's a lot of positives coming out of the Halifax club. So whilst, the long-term future may have a bit of a question mark over it with obviously the battles with HMRC, if you're ever going to talk about a left field coaching appointment, then Kyle Eastman was certainly that. There was a lot of rumours. Scott Morrell was going there. I know Scott Morrell had the interview, and ultimately Scott Morrell didn't want to give up what he is working on at Castleford in terms of the junior development, bringing on players like Fletcher Rooney and co. So ultimately, they did go left field, and, the early sort of signs are very, very, very promising. They had that early pre-season game against Keighley Cougars where they turned up with just 17 fit players. I think they ended up playing 16 out of that 17, such was the adversity 16. That they were feeling right at the start of pre-season. But, in Kyle Eastman, he's got a rich bank of experience, both as a player and a coach across both rugby codes. And you're certainly going to see a different Halifax this year. Yes, they have lost players like Joe Keys, Matty G, who've left for pastures new at Bradford. But certainly, of the few faces that they've brought in, you look at Ronan Dixon, Brad Graham, Owen Restill, Owen McCarran from Whitehaven, who I highly rate, and alongside, that new spine. In the past, we've obviously seen James Woodburn Hall at fullback. That's the new man at the back is Lewis Hugh Frey. And you've got that new halfback partnership, which, as we've seen already from those early pre-season games, you've got James Woodburn Hall, Jack Hansen, the new half, signing from Sheffield. Whilst a lot of people in this sport are saying to me, survival and staying in the championship has to be the number one aim. Whilst I do agree with people like Damien Clayton and Richard Durgan, I still think Halifax have more than enough. Obviously, I'm saying this, they don't really have too much injuries. They have a clean bill of health. I know they've lost Charlie Graham for a couple of weeks with an injury that he's picked up, but what a replacement. They've got the St. Helens and they've got Conrad Harrell potentially playing against Sheffield at the weekend. Look, ultimately, I've got Halifax 9th. That could very, very easily change if the injuries, suspensions, and if Halifax remain in special measures, which I'm told they still are, along with Whitehaven and Salford. So we are starting the new Super League Championship League One season with clubs in special measures. And what that means is the RFL control the purse strings. So Halifax don't have that luxury of being able to go out and bring players in because they don't have the money. But what Kyle Eastman does have is a very, very good core 17 who on any given day can beat anyone in that championship. I just don't see them making the playoffs. That lack of depth, lack of quality, it is going to hit Halifax at some point this season. But look, I've got them finishing 9th, and I think if you speak to Damien Clayton, Richard Durgan, even Kyle Eastman, Jimmy Lowes, they'll be absolutely, I reckon they'd snap your hands off to take 9th and avoid those bottom 4 relegation spots in the championship. Over to you, Jim Bob.
Yeah, you might be right. They might snap your hand off just for the peace of mind, but there's absolutely no doubt about it. There's a real feeling of optimism at Halifax this year. I think similar to Fordy and Featherstone, last year was a big transition year for Halifax. I felt so sorry for Liam Finn because he went in there, his hands tied behind his back with certain things. It was a squad he'd inherited from Grixie. And the draw, Oldham, first game away from home in the 1895, and they were obviously making massive strides forward. It was a nightmare start, and it was compounded by losing Brandon Douglas and Calcott for pretty much the entirety of the year, the two starting front rowers, two of the best in the whole of the championship. So for them to survive last year was massive. They won't accept that this year. Like you've touched on, the challenge for Halifax is at the moment their squad is very skinny. Their relationship with St Helens is going to be absolutely crucial for them, because when they need reinforcements, if they can bring the likes of Conrad Hurrell, T. Ritson, even some of the young players at St Helens who are, obviously very high quality, they're going to have to use that. They're going to have to make sure they use it sensibly and don't upset the apple cart. They're going to have to make sure that they just are very disciplined. They can't afford to lose players to suspensions because the size of the squad. But you said at the start, the left field call of employing Kyle Eastman. And as a company, we took a few players to Halifax in the close season to join Brandon Douglas, and Charlie Graham, who joined him halfway through. Jack Hansen, Joe Hurd and Owen Restall. Now, they signed for Finney. Finney has put together a really good side for this year, and he deserves some credit for it, because Kyle's gone in there, took the reins, and by all accounts, and I mean all accounts, which is so rare to have everything positive about someone who's coming in that situation. It's so easy for players to look for negatives or to moan. And their pre-season has been the best pre-season I've heard from any championship club. It's that positive. They're all got a real good togetherness. The small squads probably help that. This spine you've mentioned is so exciting. We've seen glimpses of it already. Sticking Jouffre at fullback and letting Jack take the reins, which he's not as young as a lot of people probably think with Jack. He went to Sheffield and he played a load of games and he's developed, but he never really had that run as a half, and he is a half, and he's now got this opportunity to prove he is a top championship halfback. And that partnership with Woodburn Hall, if they stay fit with Jouffre out the back and a player like Owen Restall to cover at the back if needed, as well as play on the wing, they are the team for me, and I touched on it in our little catch-up. They're the team for me that I've not got finishing in the playoffs, that I would not be surprised at all if they do finish in the playoffs. They just need an awful lot of luck with injuries, and they need a lot of help from St Helens at some point during the year. I'm convinced of that. I'm so excited for him with personal interest. Joe Hurd, one of the most exciting young props in the championship, has hit the floor running. He's had some brilliant performances against players who are on 20, 50 times more money than at Catalans, and he goes toe-to-toe with everybody. Brandon Douglas, one of the, if not the best in the championship. They have got the players to go to Sheffield on Sunday and win, to beat anybody on the day. If they stay fit for the majority of the season, they can get in that six, no doubt about it. They can have a good 1895 cup run, albeit they've got to go away to York. Will they get dragged into the mess at the bottom? No chance for me. No, because even if they have troubles, they'll still be too good. They'll still win too many games when they've got a strong side out. I've got them 7th. And I'm being optimistic. That's where I think they'll finish if they have an average year with suspensions and injuries. Can they sneak into the 6th? Yes. Could they finish 10th if they have real troubles with injuries? Of course they could. But hopefully, Kyle Eastman is bringing the tools to have this real strong relationship with St Helens and have a very good dual reg. He's got them playing. They're all excited. they can get in that 6, but they probably won't because we know what it's like. But what an exciting year for the Halifax fans. 7th.
There we go. Jimmy's got Halifax Panthers 7th. I've got them 9th. But as I reiterate, if injuries don't bite, those suspensions don't come, Halifax are one of those clubs alongside Doncaster and some of the other clubs we're going to cover who could be in the playoffs if the ingredients and the components all comes together. Moving on, we're on to Hunslet. So the championship newbies, and they didn't have long to celebrate that grand final win over Swinton. Their impressive promotion from League One to the championship, the first time in 9 seasons that the South Leeds side will be mixing up with the championship big boys. And, Dean Muir, spoke to him at the championship launch. 18 new faces have come through the door at the South Leeds Stadium. Unprecedented change. I think the change had to be done. I know a lot of people have said in the sport, I think no one at Hunslet, had budgeted or had even thought this was possible. But, the magic happened very, very much similar. And I'll use this as an example. What Hunslet did last year on the budget that they were spending, absolutely phenomenal. They should get the Rugby League team of the year. And that includes what Wigan achieved. Very, very similar to London in 23, when London, they've got that togetherness, they've got a coach the players are playing for, which took London to Toulouse in the grand final and then ultimately into Super League. There was a lot of that, what I saw with Hunslet. Obviously, they have lost some of their key players from last season. Jack Render, Jude Ferreira have obviously gone to other championship clubs. But, when you look at those 18 players that have come in, there's a real sort of eclectic mix of new additions. They have got a couple from Halifax, such as Kevin Leroy, Liam Wellham, very established at championship level. And I guess even with the recent signing of Greg Eden, who, again, brings a lot of experience. If Greg Eden is, on his A game and Hunslet can keep him infused and interested, he could be an absolutely, pivotal side in it. And I guess, what the challenge for Dean Muir is all about formulas. Can he get it right so Hunslet hit the ground running and they are not chasing results and wins, because it's no longer a bottom 2 that go down, it's a bottom 4. So, you can kind of say that the odds are firmly stacked against Hunslet, if it was a bottom 2, but with it being a bottom 4, I guess you know where I'm heading with this one.
Yes.
But can Dean Muir, can he get his side to play with that passion, with that team spirit that got him into the championship? I am going to say something which people might say is controversial, but I don't have them finishing in the bottom 2. I have Hunslet finishing 11th. That might shock some people, because then people are left to think, well, Michael, who's your bottom 2? Well, you're about to find out as we progress. But I just feel I've been in and around the Hunslet club during pre-season, and I'm just seeing it, Jimmy. I think that counts for a lot. And the fact that they've got some loan players, Noah Booth, who I thought was Featherstone's best player on the field when Noah Booth played for Featherstone against Goole in the pre-season game. I know Callum Turner gave him a run for his money, but I thought Noah Booth, he's now at Hunslet. I just think Dean Murray's recruitment has been very, very clever. As we've said, they've got a couple from Bradford in Mackenzie Skur, who can score a number of tries on the wing. Billy Jowett, you talk about Greg Eden, Lachlan Hannigan, one of Joe's players from Whitehaven. I'm looking at this squad and the depth that they've got, and looking at the sort of experience, your Greg Edens, your Keelan Fosters, your Liam Wellhams, your Joe Gibbons, your Kevin Leroy's, your Noah Booths. I'm just not seeing this as an out-and-out bottom championship team. That is why I'm going 11th. I wish Dean Muir the best. I know he's really looking forward to that round 2 matchup when Bradford come to the South Leeds Stadium, and there's already talk that that game's heading towards a sellout. So, you know, what a great occasions that's going to be. And I think that will be the realisation for Hunslet that they are back in the big time. You know, 3,000 sellout. They've already sold out the hospitality. Dean Moore, a self-confessed Bradford fan, former coach of West Bowling. What a journey he's been on.
I don't know why people say you always mention Bradford, Mick. Honestly, I don't get it. I don't know where we're coming from.
Let me just say something now, and I'm not saying this because Hunslet is effectively a former Bradford Academy team, but you know, Mackenzie Skerr, Alfie Goddard, you've got Billy Jowett, Cameron Berry, Keelan Foster. You know where I'm going, Kobe Nicole. You know Bailey Arnold, Evelyn O'Hanlon. There's 10 former Bradford players in this Hunslet team.
Yeah, you've got a soft spot for him.
Prove me right. You're not finishing bottom. I've got Hunslet in 11.
Well, that's a massive call, and I suppose what you've done with Hunslet is a bit like what I've done with Halifax. We know there's a lot of positives there, and we're being optimistic. You know, I think
yes, there's an optimistic
if Hunslet
approach.
have a brilliant year, that's where I think Hunslet could finish if they have a really good year. Their opener away at Barrow tomorrow, what a massive game! You know, there's some brilliant fixtures to start the year off. That's as big as any. I think both teams are already struggling with some injuries. I had some sad news about Canberra. Unfortunately, broke his arm at work yesterday. You know, so they're already having misfortune, and they can't afford to.
You're joking at work.
Yeah, so you're talking like things like this, which you know no team wants and no player wants.
They've gone down to 12 now. Money to.
And he's a massive player for him. You know, him and Ross.
He is. I've always rated Cameron. You know, always rated him.
Him and Ross, two young nines who are excited to test himself at the championship again. And yeah, look, he'll still have plenty of chance to do that. But I'm not being as optimistic as you. I just think they've done all they can with recruitment. They've added some really good young lads who've got potential to be championship players. They might already be good enough to be championship players. But it's going to be so hard for him. I don't think that Hunslet have got a massive home advantage like some of the other clubs do. You know, the other clubs I've got in the bottom four. Barrow, tough, long away day. London, tough, long away day. Batley, a massive hill. Hunslet probably isn't going to be a place that clubs dread going to. It's local for a lot of them. Even the Lancashire teams are, you know, like Widnes and the Oldham coming over. It's not that far. So I just think they've got not enough in their favour, but what they will have is togetherness. They've got to keep that spirit going. I've likened it to London last year in Super League, so that anyone turns up under strength with a poor mindset, they'll pick up points. And they've got to, you know, I think they're going to do so well to not be in the bottom four. You know, for me, it's easy for me to say the club can't think like this, but for me, the key for Hunslet is to make sure at the business end of the season, like for some of these teams who are challenging for the top or for playoff spots, they have to time their good period really well. I'd rather Hunslet struggle now because I'm convinced they'll end up in that bottom four, sadly. The main thing is that near the end of the season, when those middle eight games start, which are stacked in favour of the championship clubs, no doubt about it, it's going to be really hard for any League One team to get up. They've got to make sure they're firing then, you know, because that'll be the team that a lot of the League One clubs think, well, we had a good go at them last year, or we beat them last year. And as long as they, you know, do everything they can, keep that spirit, so when it gets to that period of a year, hopefully pick up a couple of scalps along the way and some really, you know, competitive games, get some points on the board and make sure that at the latter stages of the year, they have got players on the pitch, fit bodies, ready for what I think will be by far the most important part of the season. Sadly, I've got a coin toss with another team for finishing bottom. And the only reason I'm putting them bottom is I think this other team that we'll get to could potentially strengthen as the year goes on, and probably with home advantage will get above them. So it's not a real negative, because they're expected to find it hard. It's still very difficult to recruit and get, with the budget they had, and get hard and proven championship players together. They'd already lost Jack Render and Josh Roberts and stuff before, I believe, before they'd got themselves to the promised land. So I've got them bottom, but that's no slight on Hunslet. Let's hope that they cause some upsets, and I hope you're right and I'm wrong.
Well, carrying on with our Championship 2025 season preview, we're now on to the London Broncos, and these are certainly uncertain times for the new club in the Championship. Of course, London relegated under the new IMG metrics and replaced by Wakefield Trinity last year. No new ownership. There's no new investment as things currently stand. There's a lot of unknowns for Mike Eccles and the London Broncos going into the new season. We do know that they are heavily reliant on a lot of their former academy players. I've obviously, it's Bradford versus London tomorrow, so I've probably very, very confident in what I can say about London. And as you can see, you go through that London team for tomorrow. They have the core, Jimmy. There's still an Alex Walker there, who, of course, has been at London for since 2014. Sadiq Adebaye, Will Lovell, Marcus Stock, Curtis Davis, Lewis Bienek. I'm really, really excited to see how Conor O'Brien and Luke Paulselli, build the Australian of Italian descent who featured for Italy in the most recent World Cup. We talk about Hunslet and their eclectic mix. London Broncos, they equally have an eclectic mix, and I guess probably the main it's not a player for me. The main thing for London is Mike Eccles, the fact that he has remained as coach. He has ensured there is stability. We know from speaking to Mike at the Championship launch, he said David walked away, he'd had enough. He left the club for dead. And, let's not forget David, over 20 plus years, putting over £20 million. But, I understand, Mike's frustrations in that, David didn't stay. There was no sort of transition period with a new owner coming in. Effectively, Mike has had to rely on crowdfunding from supporters, season ticket sales to pay those 4 or 5 players who I've mentioned, who were under contract for this new season. Otherwise, the club would have gone. There would be no London at the starting line. And ultimately, there's so many unknowns on London because Mike's still confident they can get investment in later on in the year, but that is not going to help them early doors. They've got Bradford and Featherstone and York first up. It's not going to get any easier for London after going to Oldham tomorrow. It's going to be really, really tough. Yes, when I look at the team for tomorrow, you've got Cian McDermott, 19, Lucas Mawson, 19, you've got Jake Fulis, 19, you've got Zach Bardsley-Rowe, 19. They've got 5 loanee players from Wigan and Warrington, and I think that is probably, it shows you what Mike is working with. If he had a team and squad full of Alex Walkers, Lewis Bieneks, Will Lovell, Sadiq Adebaye's, Marcus Stocks, even Ben Hersey-Horde, who of course come through the Leeds Academy system, you've got a fighting chance of avoiding that bottom 4. Unfortunately, London, as they've always done, they've got that survival instinct. It is their 45th year anniversary since 1980, when of course they entered the Rugby League pyramid as Fulham. I think this is probably going to be their toughest ever year yet. Mike hopes they can avoid the bottom 4. That is their target. Unfortunately, I'm just looking at this now, and I'm doing this preview, and this is where my prediction is, and this is why I have London finishing bottom in 13th. There's just too many unknowns at this moment in time, and I just hope to God that they don't go to Hunslet tomorrow and it ends up being a 40 or a 50, or against Featherstone at home and then York the week after, because the season could quite easily derail. London, like Hunslet, like Barrow, like Batley, they are going to have to absolutely go through that fixture list, comb through it, and they are going to have to target specific games, which they're going to have to target to avoid the bottom four. But sadly, I just can't see it. A lot of respect for Mike and what he's done. You know, he could have gone to Huddersfield and another Super League club, he told me. But he's decided to stay. He's decided to keep the London Broncos heartbeat going. He deserves, you know, probably an knighthood for what he's done in this off season. I know you're laughing, Jimmy, but look, you know, if Mike hadn't had stayed to stabilise, London would not be at the starting line.
Totally agree with you. Totally agree with you. It would have been if, you know, if he hadn't stayed, like you say, and kept that continuity, because he's such an important part of what that club have done for donkey's years now. And he will get the absolute best out of any player, whether he's got them for the season or he's got them on loan, or he picks them up halfway through the year, or even sooner, when hopefully this investment comes in and allows them to bring in some players that he'll only ever sign the correct players. I can guess, an educated guess, that he's possibly turned down more players than he's brought in, or will bring in, of a certain stature and level, because they're not the right fit. And what he's not willing to do is bring in the wrong people who won't buy into how they do things, how professionally they run everything, because that's just how he is, and rightly so. And it's all about the club first. Now, thankfully, because of his reputation and how well liked he is in the game, he is going to get help from some Super League clubs. We've seen 2 Warrington lads in the team for tomorrow. Yes, they're young, but the quality. Will Bradford Bulls be too tough a challenge for him and for the London side tomorrow? I expect so. But in those 4-point matches, with the teams who will be at that bottom end around him, they will be good enough against those teams. So I think you're right. They've got to pick the matches. They've got to be patient. For me, it's the dream start in a really bizarre way. Playing York, Fev and Bradford, who I think will be 3 of the top 4, get them out of the way. You know, and it could be hard for them to, no matter how good their team ends up at some point this year, it'd still be hard to beat those. He's under no illusions how big this challenge is. The aim for this year is to stabilise the club. It's still going to be very hard, as I touched upon before, for anyone from the league below to take their place, or anyone's place for that matter. So this year is all about steadying the ship, building going forward. They've still got real belief that they will get back to the big time over the next few years. And I've got them second from bottom for the same reasons as you have. There's so many uncertainties. It's so hard for him to get players in, even when they get a little bit of financial help, hopefully, and getting the right players. They'll probably have too much work to do when they get to that stage. It's still a tough away day for lots of teams, going down there and the travel and preparing like they normally would for a more local away day. He'll get the best out of them all. They'll certainly pick up wins. And for that reason, I've got him certainly in the bottom 4. It's hard to place him exactly, but I've stuck him 12th. 12th for now, but it could very much be a season of 2 halves. And again, like Hunslet and Barrow and Batley, the most important thing for me, if that bottom 4 is correct, they just need to make sure that last period of the season, they're at the best. The start of the year, far less important. So all the best to Mike and the London lot. They're in for a tough year, but I'm sure they'll get through it. 12th.
There we go. A point difference. I've got London bottom. I hope London don't finish bottom, but as Jimmy says, far too many unknowns at this stage, and hopefully the investment is forthcoming. It does come, and they strengthen ahead of potentially that Super 8 fixtures against the League One clubs. Moving on, Oldham Well, few clubs
Wow.
have entered the Championship from the bottom tier as strong as Oldham. In my time covering the Championship, they absolutely romped to a canter to that League One title last season, and they are recruiting a team under Sean Long that is certainly more than good enough and more than capable for the Championship. You look at the players who they've brought in: Matty Ashurst, Adam Milner, Ian Thornley, Jill Dudson, Josh Drinkwater, Phoenix Lalauta Togagate from Hulkeston Rovers. Wow. You throw in Danny Craven, Riley Dean, Kieran Dixon, Jordan Turner, Logan Ashley, of course, the former Wigan Academy fullback. And you can see why, Oldham aren't just coming up like Doncaster probably did last year to stabilise. I think Mike Ford and Oldham, they are coming up to really, literally uproot and move some trees and transport the ground earth. Interestingly, the pack, Owen Farnworth, Jill Dudson, Lawton, Milner, I think that is a top 4 pack on paper. I think, again, when you look at a number of these Championship sides, certainly we've mentioned Bradford with that depth. Hunslet, they've got a little bit of depth, big squad. Oldham, they too have that strength. They have that depth. They won't be relying on dual reg loan. I always believe, Jimmy, that in my opinion, puts you up a place because you're not dealing with that disruption. They do have that dual reg agreement with Wigan. I think that could be absolutely interesting. If they've already got George Hurst, who they sold to Wigan. He's back on loan. But, you look at that Wigan squad and you look at those Wigan players who are not going to be getting in, week out. If they end up coming to Oldham, Sean Long's got a big decision. I'm not saying it's going to destabilise the Oldham team, but as we've seen with other Championship clubs time and time again, you take 3 or 4 quality players from Wigan, your own players then get disillusioned. That affects cohesion and morale. And I think similar to Widnes, with their dual reg with Warrington and Halifax and St Helens, Kyle Eastman, Alan Coleman, Sean Long, they're probably in a very tricky position because they've got access to a wealth of Super League stars and talent, but it's how they use that and utilise it. Look, I am going to make a very big call here. They are the new boys on the block. I just cannot see Oldham, with all the money that they are spending, the pack, the spine, when you've got players like Pat Moran, Elijah Taylor, the Chapelhouse in the 20s, the high teens and the 20s, I tell you what, I've got Oldham 6th. I have actually got Oldham sneaking into the playoffs in 6th. Jimmy Mack, over to you. And I'm sure the Oldham fans would absolutely be delighted and they would snap my hand off to get a playoff spot.
Yeah, really funny one, this, isn't it? I've never heard, when discussing with players, coaches, getting excited about this Championship year, as you introduced with it, I can't remember a team who've jumped in with quite so much hope and expenditure, signings, quality.
The last one, Jimmy, would be Toronto. It would be the high-flying spending Toronto.
And that's what I was thinking. And that was a very different situation. I mean, we look where Oldham were 4 or 5 years ago. This is such a massive transformation of a club.
Massive.
So there seems to be a split camp between these boys have got such a good squad and clearly a coach who knows how to play rugby league and a board that are backing the side and investing, but they're going to arrive and they're going to tear it up. I've had an unnamed Championship coach tell me that they think they'll win it. That is the boldest prediction I've heard, but plenty understandably saying they'll be right up there. Now, they have spent an awful lot of money. Again, we never really know exactly how much, but my understanding is that they'll be in the top 4 for how much they've spent.
I was just going to say, they'll be with Toulouse, with Bradford, with Featherstone.
Yeah, and maybe not quite as high as obviously Toulouse will probably be the top box, but they're spending a lot of money. They've invested a lot of money. So you said they will be delighted to get in the playoffs. I think that they have to be in the playoffs because I do know this much. There'll be plenty of teams spending a lot less than them. And if any of them who are spending half getting ahead of them, there'll be, there'll probably be serious inquiries going on internally. There's a lot of pressure on Sean Long, again, because of the squad they've put together. He has to deliver almost straight off the bat. They've got York at home first game. What a game. And we'll learn a lot. We'll learn a lot there because York are a proven top championship side. So that's going to be so interesting tomorrow. I'm actually at the Sheffield Halifax game because that again will be class. Very interesting game. But that'll be the one I'm keeping eyes on because I think it's so intriguing. And then the other camp is, yes, they've signed well. Yes, they had a brilliant year last year. But can they transfer that to the Championship? Josh Drinkwater is a massive signing, but we haven't got a clue how we'll play in the Champ. It's so different. So there's a lot of question marks against him and others of are they actually going to be superstars in the Champ? Because it's very differently running up the hill at Batley than it is playing on a carpet at Super League grounds. So for me, there's question marks. I think they've got a lot of players who have never convinced me, even in the Championship. I think they're brilliant when it's going well and they're having a good day and they're in good ball and it's easy. I don't know how many fighters they've got in there for those real tough challenges. So I don't think they'll be in the top four. Now, will they make the six? They've got to. I think it's as simple as that. They've got to. I don't think they're guaranteed. I'm finding them the hardest team to probably place because of all the things we've said. I have got them in the sixth, and I'm putting them fifth because for the simple reason they should be. They should be in the top five. So I'm going to back Longy. I'm going to back a lot of their recruitment. But would I be surprised if they are fighting to get in that six with 2-3 rounds to go? Not at all, because there's a lot of question marks. I just think they've probably got that little bit of, like Donny had last year, new team, exciting, get some big scalps at home, but they could slip up away when they least expect it. So I am putting them fifth.
Wow, there we go. I've got them sixth. Jimmy's got them fifth. We've still got Sheffield, Toulouse, Widnes and York to come, and we are on the Sheffield Eagles now. And for the first time in nearly 2 decades, I think it's actually 19 years, there's no Mark Aston. And the man tasked with turning around Sheffield Eagles' fortunes is Craig Lingard, fresh from his season in the Super League with the Castleford Tigers. But, Craig Lingard, he probably is the bread and butter man from the Championship after his time with Keighley and, of course, Batley Bulldogs, where he had all that success, helping the Batley Bulldogs into the playoffs and, of course, the £1 million game. Interestingly, on Sheffield, they brought in Jack Walker, Massimo Tongo. There's a few new faces to add to already that experience that was already there with Matty Marsh, Ben Jones-Bishop, Chris Wellham, James Glover, Matty Dawson-Jones, Morgan Smith joined from Hull FC, similar with Massimo Tongo. Corey Ashton, obviously, they've lost a couple, Isaac Farrell, Jack Hansen. So it's an interesting how that spine all pieces and fits together. And obviously, Jesse Senilaveo has just recently been released. Bailey Lou obviously asked for a release and that was granted. So again, not quite wholesale changes that we've seen at some of the other clubs, but I do think that, continuity will help Craig Lingard. And, they have a very tough game first up. Very, very difficult for me to actually assess where Sheffield currently are. I spoke to Craig Lingard last week ahead of the Wigan game, and they said Mitch Clark's out, Morgan Smith's out. They've got a lot of injuries at the start of the season, and it's probably going to be very, very similar to some other clubs in that you're probably not going to see Sheffield hit their, or should I say, fly and be the best until probably round 6, round 7. Look, Sheffield, very, very tough place to go. Craig Lingard, he will have them absolutely firing on all cylinders. They could be, in my opinion, a side that puts pressure on your Bradfords, your Toulouse, your Featherstones for that top 4. But equally, they could be in that fight. And this is where I've got Sheffield. I've got them in that fight with Widnes, with Doncaster, with Oldham for a playoff spot. I've got Sheffield for the second year running just to miss out in 7th. But I would not be shocked if they finish 4th, if they finish 5th or 6th and actually got on. I think Craig Lingard, probably pound for pound, one of the most intelligent, knowledgeable championship coaches that there is. This is his bread and butter. You go to the fish restaurant, they give you the bread and butter. Look, that's what Craig Lingard's all about. And look, exciting times for Sheffield, uncertain times, because you are going from the Mark Aston era. We know that how that ended. We know Mark's still appealing. But when you look at the squad, a very good, capable squad, and we didn't mention the 2 nines, Corey Johnson and Reece Butterworth, both currently out injured, which doesn't really help Sheffield. As I said, when Craig Lingard told me last week, he's got 8, of his first sort of 20 players missing with injury. They're starting behind the 8 ball. So I've just got Sheffield missing out, but I wouldn't be shocked or surprised if the Eagles are flying in the playoffs.
Yeah, to pick up where you left off, for me, they're a team who could come 4th or they could come 7th. I do not think for 1 second they'll come lower than that, because, like you've just named a lot of the side there, there's such a group of quality ex-Super League, some young players at the right age who are ready to have big years. Reece Butterworth, Corey Johnson have replaced Vila and Kyle Wood. Vila had a great year last year. He's decided to, pack the game in for other reasons. Those 2 young hookers, could be sensational. They've lost Jack Hansen, big loss, but and they lost Anthony Thackeray, massive loss. They've brought in Morgan Smith. So they're probably, for me, a bit weaker in the halves, but then they're a bit stronger at 9. They lose a couple of their quality, fringe players, but they've still got the likes of Lewis Peachy there, who would walk into most championship teams, who's still fighting for a first team place. They've got Ben Jones-Bishop, walks into any championship team. They've got great centres. They've got front rowers. They have got the personnel to get 4th. However, this is a seismic change in circumstance. Mark Aston has been the coach for so long. It's forever. It's a tough challenge for anybody to go in there and let Sheffield pick up where they left off. Lingard, his CV is exceptional. You won't hear a bad word about him. Great bloke. But it's still going to be a huge challenge. He's going to have his own ideas. They're going to be different from what went before him. Everything was done quite late in the day. Their pre-season has been disrupted. It's been delayed. So I think that they're going to have a tough start to the year. Now, how do they recover from that? They could go on a 10-match winning spree because they've got the players. But we know what it's like for clubs who don't get off to a good start. And I'm not saying they won't, but I think that's a real possibility that they will be slow to get going. And it'll be a tough first 6 rounds. If they are left chasing that top 6, and we see teams like Oldham get off to a flyer, and Widnes, and even Halifax, teams like that get off to a flyer, and then they're looking up, the pressure builds, and it's going to be really tough. So really hard to call again. Jack Bussey, great signing. You know, the nines I've talked about, great signings. Morgan Smith, he's been around his experience. You know, he's a solid player to go alongside Corey Aston. I have got them getting sixth spot. I think they've got too much good players, too much going on. Lingard proven. It will take time, but I think they'll have enough to get in the playoffs. We'll see how they start. I think they need a good start and not to put too much pressure on themselves. If they have a good start, then we're talking about can we get top four. But I won't be surprised if it's a slower start and they've got a, you know, like last year where they dropped out. Hopefully this year they'll creep in. So yeah, really interesting year ahead for the Sheffield Eagles. Starting with a real tough challenge at home to Halifax on Sunday. If they get through that, 2 points on the board, they're up and running, and yeah, we'll see. It'll be a great year for him, I'm sure. Sneaking in the playoffs.
There we go. Jimmy has Sheffield in 7th. I've got them 6th, so a little slight bit of difference there, but nothing too major.
You've got them 7th, I've got them 6th, yeah.
Yeah, but you know, as you know, Jimmy, that could be flipped around. Right, yeah. Moving on. Let us know in the comments. We've just done Oldham and Sheffield. Where do you feel they're going to be? Final couple of clubs coming up in the Championship, and it's Toulouse Olympic now. Toulouse obviously made it to the Championship Grand Final. They lost out to Wakefield, and they also just lost out a Super League spot to Salford under the new IMG club grading system. So also near to realising, you know, Sylvain Houlet, Cedric Garcia's dreams of a top-flight return back to the Super League. Of course, they were in the Super League in 22 after that amazing season in 21. Well, you might say Toulouse look a little bit weaker this year, and I think that's a very fair sort of observation. They have lost Harrison Hansen, they have lost Eli Pelissier, they have lost Guy Armitage, and very late in the day, Ryan Rivett, of course, their Australian half, decided to return back to Australia. Now, when I spoke to Sylvain Houlet at their media day a couple of weeks ago, he said there are steps in place to mitigate losing Ryan Rivett. And as we saw in their recent game against the Catalan Dragons, Anthony Marion was partnering Jake Shorrocks in the halfback. And I was getting perhaps a little bit giddy, you know, 20 minutes in. They had scored 2 tries, leading 10-0. They had a 3rd try disallowed. From what I saw of that game on the stream that I was watching, I was very impressed by Toulouse. Catalans who come stronger, and you saw that sort of full-time Super League environment against the Championship environment play out in that second half. But this is still a very competitive squad. You know, they have that spine. If the spine is going to be Ollie Asholbot, Anthony Marion and Jake Shorrocks, there's a lot of danger, a lot of flair, a lot of strike there. And as we know, you know, the forward pack, Lambert Belmas, James Romanus, Maxim Stefani, Dominic Peru, Anthony Marion, Callan Garn. Look, that for mine is just behind Bradford's. That is the biggest pack, or the second biggest pack in the Championship behind Bradford's, which will absolutely bulldoze and steamroll a number of Championship sides, especially when you get into those sort of May, June, July, you know, very dry, firm places. What Toulouse do have, of course, at their advantage is that impressive Stade Ernest Wallon. That is more than likely going to be a very tough away fixture for every Championship club. And as I've already mentioned, they've got that exciting spine of Asholbot. Interesting who Sylvain brings in to cover Ryan Rivett. I have Toulouse second. We know they don't participate in the Challenge Cup. We know they don't participate in the 1895. But look, they are a full-time team. They are spending over €1 million on this squad. They are going to strengthen. Sylvain's confirmed it. They're going to look to Australia, New Zealand for a quality half. That's probably going to then allow Anthony Marion to go back to his normal loose forward, back row position. And, you know, I know a lot of people will say, yeah, Harrison Hansen, Guy Armitage, Eli Pelissier, But when the cavalry comes, and, we've got to take Sylvan's word for it, the cavalry is coming. Toulouse, very, very formidable, very, very strong, a lot of strength in depth. Second for mine, and they will be challenging Featherstone and Bradford for the top spot. Over to you, Jimmy.
Yeah, great. Some information I didn't know there. It's always hard to keep tabs on Toulouse compared to, the UK clubs for me personally. So I always feel it's a bit of an unknown, the exact details. I never hear an awful lot about how things are behind the scenes, how...
Oh, Jimmy, me and Cedric, very, very close. We're always
I'm
WhatsApping.
under no illusion why you've put them just behind the Bradford for when you make your next trip over there. But like you say,
Cedric, get the barbecue ready. No, I'm joking.
that full-time advantage is massive. The home advantage is massive.
Yes.
I'm just going for a slightly different narrative, and I think as the last couple of years have gone by, I think teams going over there are not just going for a lovely weekend away. I think there's more and more teams each year as certain championship teams strengthen, that they go over there with a real belief that they can get the job done. So I'd argue they don't pick up as many easy points at home. I still think the home record will be outstanding, but I think they have more games where teams turn up with a real belief and desire to take the 2 points home with them. So for that reason, combined with the fact that I think they will be more vulnerable on the road early in the season, particularly against the other teams I've got up at the top end of the table, and even those ones that were really unsure where to place. I think there's 7 or 8 teams at least this year who, with a strong side out at home, could get to lose. And for me, that's a lot of points that they could drop, as well as dropping a few at home. So, I mean, they beat Wakey at home last year, so, plenty could turn around and say, well, you're talking rubbish because, the home record, it'll still be fantastic and people can turn up with whatever attitude they want. But in the temperature and the conditions and their support behind them, it's still such a tough away day. But we'll see. That half-back going and still to be replaced is the final piece in the puzzle why I'm actually going to put them fourth.
Oh, big one, big call.
So it is a bit of a big call, but I've got too many unknowns there. And Bradford, Featherstone and the final team that I've got finishing above them, I don't have any question marks, or very few question marks. So I'm going to side with what I know and back them to pip Toulouse to the top 3.
Well, we're down to the final 2 clubs in our championship preview. We're now moving on to the Widnes Vikings. The dark years, at long, long last, have gone. They made the playoffs for the first time since their relegation from the Super League in 2018. And the corner is certainly well and truly turned, in my opinion, for the Widnes Vikings. Last season, they finished 5th, and it was their best performance, as we've said, since their relegation from the Super League. And the fans finally have a reason, in my opinion, to approach this new championship season with optimism. Alan Coleman, he deserves a medal, glowing endorsement for what he has done to that club. Please listen to the interview I did with Alan. It's on the SoundCloud page. And I asked him a question about the infectious enthusiasm he has. You see him before the game. He comes running across. He gets the fans going in the stands. He is the heartbeat of that club. And, he deserves a lot of credit for what he's done in transforming Widnes in what was his first year as head coach. And now that sort of, you talk about the pressure and that bar at Bradford being raised high after what they've done against Huddersfield and Castleford. Well, that is now what's at Widnes. They made the playoffs last year. They went to York and beat York. They've had a great time. Big scalps. They did the treble over Bradford. They did them in the Challenge Cup. They did them home and away in the league. They pushed Toulouse all the way. They give Wakefield equally a run for the money in the cup and the league. And all of a sudden, you know, when you look at the players that they've brought in, you see Deck Patton's there, a very good playmaker from Cornwall. Cameron Brown's gone in there. He's obviously taken Lewis Hall, Gavin Benyon from Swinton, Alan Coleman's former club, of course, who got relegated. Brett Bailey, a very young player from St Helens. Regan Sumner from Wigan, who have both had previous loan spells at the club. And Aidan Doolan, of course, a former Widnes youngster who then went to Australia. He's come back. And when I was at the Warrington Widnes game, which Widnes won, albeit it was an understrength Warrington side, I'm taking nothing whatsoever away from the Widnes Vikings. You know, who makes it into their spine is probably Alan Coleman's biggest challenge, because at the moment you're looking at Joe Lyons, Jack Owens, Tom Gilmore. You know, as we said, we've got Deck Patton. So it remains to be seen how Alan's going to fit everything all together in terms of, you know, that spine. And, you know, I asked Alan the difficult question, probably the $1 million question. I said, you know, Deck Patton's probably had more clubs, you know, than many people have probably had hot dinners, pardon the pun. But, you know, if he can get Deck Patton engaged, get him infused, then wow, you know, the former Salford, Bradford man, Deck Patton, he could be the key for Widnes' success. Look, it's going to be tougher. There's an Oldham in there. Bradford are spending. Featherstone, in my opinion, rebuilding and looking very, very good. Can Widnes make the playoffs again? Second year running. Fifth last season. I have Widnes in the playoffs. I think that home form, absolutely crucial and key. I think they have that depth, that quality in that spine. We've not really mentioned the nines, but, you know, Jordan Johnston, been there, done it, worn the T-shirt. Look, I think Widnes just make the playoffs ahead of Sheffield and Doncaster. But again, I do have Widnes in that York, Sheffield, Oldham, Doncaster cluster. If my top three is locked in as Bradford, Toulouse and Featherstone, Widnes are in that next sort of 4 or 5 clubs. They could finish 4th. They could finish 7th or 8th. But I'm backing Alan Coleman. I'm backing the Widnes Vikings. The dark clouds have gone. You've now got warm, radiant sunshine. The Chemics, the back. They're in the playoffs for the second year running. And what a year it's going to be for Alan Coleman and the Vikings. Another strong season of progress. Widnes Vikings, 6th.
Yeah, the Widnes fans will love that appraisal. I think it's very positive, and you're seeing it from a very positive perspective. And I'm not disagreeing with a vast majority of it.
Oh, here comes the pessimism. I can feel it already.
Well, I'll reiterate what you said. I mean, I will never forget a phone call I got off an ex-Widnes coach saying, Jimmy, get me some lads from that side of Pennines, because these boys, some of these boys, need a real shake-up. They were too comfortable. They were a team that you'd hear players say they've got no underbelly. You know, once you get into them, the buckle. And I feel this was the Widnes for many years. But of course, they had a good roster, and playing on the 4G is a nice advantage. But they didn't really have that steel, and that was the reason why their results, when you look through their years, for a good number of years, would be all over the place. Really good days, really bad days, but a team that no one was really scared of anything that Widnes offered. I've never spoke to a prop going, oh no, I don't like playing him, I don't like that. It was always this soft underbelly, which I believe Alan Coleman took massive strides in getting rid of last year, and has continued to build on that going into this year. So credit where credit's due. I think his recruitment has been exactly what was required there. Widnes fans should be excited. It was so tight last year, they ended up just creeping in, but he had a period of, you know, injuries and drop points like most clubs did. So totally agree with you. There's absolutely no reason why they can't get in the playoffs. However, I am putting them outside the playoffs. It could be I've got that little bit of bias towards Halifax. I'll be honest, and I'm being as optimistic about Halifax as you are being about Widnes, and we know it's so tight to call. So I'm sticking my neck on the line and putting Halifax above Widnes. I'm keeping Sheffield above Widnes. I think Oldham have got to be above Widnes, and then my top four is locked in. So I have got Widnes in eighth, but I will caveat that by saying I think that's the absolute lowest they can come. I've put them as low as I think they can come for the reasons I've just said. Can they finish in the playoffs? Absolutely. Deck Patton is a massive call. Like you say, he has been around the block. He has played at the highest level. On his day, he can be outstanding at championship level. But he can also be terrible. There's no player who can be one end of each, the spectrum or the other like Deck Patton. You'll see him have games and he'll be immaculate. He'll kick teams to death. He'll come up with skill. He'll come up with assists. And you'll think he's probably best player in the champ. And you'll see other days where he is literally the worst player on the field. Alan Coleman at Swinton last year nearly got enough out of Deck and nearly kept him for long enough so that they survived. He went to Fev and did next to nothing to help forward his plight. This is the extremities of this individual. You touched on it. I don't know what's coming. He could go in there, start nearly every week, and he could make Widnes a top 4 team. He could be in and out of a team. He's got a big call as Alan to change his half-back pairing of last year to accommodate that pattern. So he's got some big calls to make. But their season will probably depend on how Alan manages that situation and can he get the best out of Deck. There's no reason why he can't. But currently, that CV is the most ridiculously up and down I've ever seen. So that is the big question mark. That is why I have favoured other teams above him. Widnes will not finish below 8th, and they could definitely have a charge to finish higher. But I'm putting him 8th. And yeah, but I'm sure they're in for another really good year and another step in the right direction under a real savvy coach.
There we go. Oh, big decisions. And just finally, it is the York Knights. Nothing much to say really on York other than that Mark Applegarth, he goes into his first full season as head coach of York, and he will lay the foundations on what happened last year for a real strong, showing. Again, I've got York very much in that sort of Widnes, Sheffield, Oldham bracket, just outside the top 3 of Bradford, Toulouse and Featherstone. I think the recruitment, Paul McShane, we've discussed him to death on the full 80 minutes. The former Man of Steel, he could be absolutely crucial, imperative for York's success on the field. They have lost Will Job, AJ Towers, Nico Williams, smart recruitment, dipping the toes into League One with Jude Ferreira and some other championship players, Jude Law, and of course, Kieran Buchanan. But by and large, that York squad is the same as it was last year. Your Will Daggers, your Liam Harrises, your Atto Nganos. It has strengthened with Paul McShane, Jesse D. Bailey, Connor Bailey, Jordan Thompson. There's a lot of experience there, and they are going to be there or thereabouts. I've got York 4th. But I wouldn't be surprised if they breached that top 3, and they will put a lot of pressure on Bradford, Toulouse, and Featherstone.
Yeah. I hope people don't think we're sitting on the fence, because ultimately we are actually nailing down our
I've locked them in at 4th. Yeah.
And there is understandably teams where, with a few injuries and a few suspensions or a real good run, it's going to be so tight. It's going to be so tight that it's impossible to really speak with total confidence of where a team's going to finish, give or take 2 positions. I'm being quite straightforward here. The injury troubles York had the year before last and at the start of last year was a big factor in why Hendo lost his job. It was so tough for him because it was so hard to get their team on the pitch.
Agree.
The second half of last year, Applegarth, quality coach, proven. It's not even up for debate. The players seem to really like him and buy into his approach. Their form in the second half of last year, I'm convinced will continue into this year. They destroyed a weak Keighley, which is not to be, judged, with too much weighting. But the way they played, you can see things. Their effort against UKR was also very, very positive for the period of time that part-time teams can possibly compete with a full-time team at Super League. So I'm actually putting York in 3rd. I think that they will have enough to get above Toulouse because I'm sure they can't have as much misfortune as they've had over the years. The most underrated player, I thought, last year in the Championship, who never got anywhere near the accolades he deserved, except probably from his teammates, is Mick. And this will probably prove how underrated he might be and off the radar he might be.
What, at York?
Well, who do you think I'm talking to? Who I believed was the most underrated player last year. And I say underrated because he'd almost never get a mention. You'd never get clubs asking who the hell's he and that sort of thing. The pundits covering York would never mention him because they'd focus on others.
Probably Connor Fitzsimmons.
No, but yeah.
Joe Brown. Joe Brown was going to be the second.
No, Josh Daly. Josh Daly was superb. As good as any 9 in that league, easily. Probably for me, for 1 9 in that league who could play Super League and drop in, no problem. He's gone. Massive loss, but they've replaced him with Paul McShane. Now, if York get over 15 games out of Paul McShane and they don't suffer elsewhere any more than anyone else, I think they'll get that top 3 because he is, let's be honest, he still could be playing top level Super League. That's how highly I rate him. What he brings around training and what he can offer in experience and composure is next to none. There's no one better than him at that. And just running a game from 9, so that is such a big signing. The cynics will say, yeah, well, they'll not get 10 games out of him. He'll be injured and all this, but I believe he will. Do I expect him to play week in, week out? No, I don't, but he doesn't need to. There's certain fixtures where he can probably give that body a rest. And what he will add to players like Connor Fitzsimmons, who's come back this year and looks like twice the player he was last year. And last year, by the way, I'd have him in pretty much every Championship team going. You've got Atuingana, who I think is as good as any halfback in the league. They've got these players. Jordan Thompson walks into the Championship Team of the Year every year. Like, literally. Nobody better. So they've got too much going on for me that as long as they don't have ridiculous misfortune like I believe I've had for periods of the last couple of years, I think it's fair time. I think it's fair time to really mix it with those top 2-3 teams, Bulls, Feb, Toulouse. I can't see him being outside the top 4 unless Oldham do something ridiculous, which I don't really think they will. So I'm locking them in, just pipping Toulouse to get in that 3rd spot. And I think it's going to be a fantastic year down at the LNER Stadium. But what a tough game for them. They've got to go to back me up. They've got to go to Widnes and win. I've just put Widnes in 8th and York in 3rd. If they go to Widnes and Widnes beat them by 20, I'm already looking daft because Widnes are clearly the real deal and York are not as good as I expect without getting too carried away with a round 1 fixture. But I think everything is set up for an absolute top year. But make no mistake, Paul McShane is key to that. If he plays less than 10, they're a playoff team. If he plays 20, the top 4, and anywhere in between. He's got to be such a big part of what they do. So there we go. That completes our assessment of all the teams. We've not got too much difference as always. We're usually very similar, but we've got a few teams, a few positions away from each other. So yeah, back over to you, Mick.
Yeah, well, if you've watched It's a Mammoth, we thought we were going to do it for an hour, but it's over 2 hours long. So thank you for joining us. Let us know in the comments. What's that for, Jimmy?
I'm just thinking we're gonna see. We'll have to split it into 2 because people are gonna look and think them 2 idiots rabbiting on about.
No, it's going as one. No, we're not.
We'll put it in. Well, either way, we'll let people. We can timestamp where, and people will know it's alphabetical. So if they're only interested in hearing what we're saying about their team, or they want to skip through, 1 hour 50 minutes of Bradford. They know what.
There's not been 1 hour and 50 minutes of Bradford. There's probably been more talk about Toulouse and Featherstone and Oldham, to be fair, than Bradford. But no, thank you very much for joining us. It has been Show Me the Money Rugby League TV. We are doing this on the Saturday ahead of Toulouse against Widnes, so we've locked everything in. I'm sure when Sam, our producer, listens to our predictions, he will put a graphic up at the end with our predictions. They will be locked in. We will be doing regular monthly Championship and League One updates. So please subscribe to Show Me the Money Rugby League TV. You've got the best in the business, the game caller, Jimmy Mack, and hopefully this Championship season delivers as we expect it to be. Thank you very much for joining us. We will see you probably next week on YouTube.